Hello, comrades, and welcome to another video on the Chinese Revolution area of study 2. In this video, we'll continue our study of the Cultural Revolution by considering the revolutionary forces and the foes or enemies or targets of the Cultural Revolution. So here's a quote by Mao. He said, "Marxism boils down to thousands of truths, but they all boil down to one sentence. It is right to rebel." So let's start by looking at the key revolutionary forces, of which there are four. The first, as we've discussed previously, are the Red Guards. Look at all these Red Guards here at Tiananmen Square holding up their little red books, all in matching uniforms. So the Cultural Revolution was really driven by the Red Guards. The Red Guards were comprised mainly of young students, and they became Mao's power base as he looked to reinstall himself as leader while purging his critics and rivals. They were mobilized in June 1966, and within weeks, they had mobilized into a political militia of over 10 million. They were motivated by Mao's slogans, "It is right to rebel," as well as "bombard the headquarters," which we looked at briefly in our last video. And so Red Guards attacked perceived threats to Mao or his socialist vision, those being intellectuals, corrupt cadres, party leaders, and the Four Olds. There's a little hint at some of the foes or targets of the revolution. They carried out violent struggle sessions on any perceived threats, and I'll discuss some of those violent struggle sessions when we look at some of the targets. Now, for a year, they created what Mao called Great Chaos Under Heaven. When the Red Guards became even more violent in 1967, Mao authorized the People's Liberation Army to suppress them. The following year, he started the Up to the Mountain, Down to the Countryside movement to send Red Guards and young people in China to the countryside to learn from the peasants. So Red Guards really did drive the Cultural Revolution, and they were mainly young people. Rebel workers. So from November 1966, workers were urged to join the Cultural Revolution. Militant office and factory workers formed rebel groups. Now, there were many factions within these rebel groups. And here's a quote saying, "The rebel faction was made up of ordinary small people, people without any power. When you joined the rebel faction, you felt better. When we talked with each other, we could feel a sense of relief." So that comes from someone who was in one of those rebel groups. In January 1967, during a period of rebel factional infighting in Shanghai, Jiang Chongqiu, who was an ally of Jiang Qing and was a member of the Gang of Four, urged the Red Rebels faction to, quote, "seize power." Within a week, they had toppled the authorities, and on the 5th of February, a Shanghai People's Commune was proclaimed. Now, under the slogan "Seize Power," radicals in provinces and cities throughout China copied what had been done in Shanghai, and this collectively became known as the January Storm. Now, the January Storm led to a situation in which decentralized radical groups grappled with party leaders, and as a result, the CCP almost stopped functioning. Mao and Zhou Enlai aimed to restore order by limiting travel for Red Guards and rebels. They also issued new guidelines, so prior approval from the central government was needed before any regional authorities could be overthrown. And then this was followed on the 10th of March by a directive mentioned here, the 3-in-1 revolutionary committees of soldiers, radical party cadres, and rebels should assume leadership of all institutions. Factional fighting did continue, however, and it took a long time for order to be restored. This became so bad. Here's just a fun fact that on the 20th, well, not too fun, but a fact, on the 22nd of August, 1967, the British consulate was burned down. So these rebel workers and the 3-in-1 revolutionary committees really caused a stir during the Cultural Revolution and damaged industrial output as well as foreign relations, as is seen by the British consulate being burned down. Now, Jiang, always the revolutionary and leader of the Gang of Four, continued to stir popular action among workers, being quoted as saying, "To stop production is revolution itself." So this led to a sharp decline in industrial output during the Cultural Revolution. Now, speaking of Jiang Qing's Gang of Four was another revolutionary force of the Cultural Revolution. They were a radical faction of the CCP aligned with Mao Zedong. They're pictured here after their arrest in 1976. All four members held fairly minor positions until the mid-1960s. Three joined Mao's Cultural Revolution Small Group Committee in 1966, and they developed into the Gang of Four, and they started wielding significant power, particularly in the 1970s. Jiang Qing, in particular, encouraged revolutionary action by Red Guards and rebels, so she really spurred the flames of revolution among these groups. Now, at the 10th CCP Congress in August 1973, Mao elevated the Gang of Four into the Politburo. And between 1973 and 1975, Jiang, Wang, Yao, and Zhang, the Gang of Four, exercised near total control of the press and publications. Now, this wasn't to everyone's liking. A lot of people felt them to be too radical. And so even at the 10th Party Congress, Mao tried to counteract some of the sort of extremism of the Gang of Four by instituting many moderates into the government as well, including Deng Xiaoping, funnily enough. But speaking of Deng Xiaoping, a criticized Confucius campaign was launched in late 1973, which was largely overseen by Jiang Qing. Over time, Mao's rivals and enemies were incorporated into this campaign. So the criticized Confucius campaign goes hand in hand with one of the targets that we'll look at, the Four Olds, trying to attack old ideas and old customs. So by associating some of Mao's rivals and enemies with Confucianism, they were subjected by the Gang of Four to criticism and self-criticism. The most notable of these targets were the late Lin Biao, Zhou Enlai, and Deng Xiaoping. Now, after Mao's death in 1976, the Gang of Four were exposed and arrested, and in November 1980, they were brought to trial. Jiang Qing explained her role in the Cultural Revolution. She is quoted as saying, "I was Mao's dog. Whoever he told me to bite, I bit." How true that is, I suppose we'll never know. But Jiang was sentenced to life imprisonment and committed suicide while in custody in 1991. So the Gang of Four were within the party, within the government, or at least became part of the government, and were the key sort of revolutionary group within the government, and the sort of radical extremists, if you will. Now, Lin Biao, we've spoken about Lin Biao before, so I won't spend too long on this. We already know his role in growing Mao's cult of personality by compiling Mao's quotes into the Little Red Book and sponsoring emulation campaigns such as Learn from the PLA or Learn from Lei Feng. However, during the Cultural Revolution, Lin Biao also played an active role. He regularly spoke at Red Guard rallies, and he urged young people to destroy the Four Olds. Those being old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits. We'll talk about that more shortly. On the 15th of September, 1966, Lin Biao urged Red Guards to, quote, focus on denouncing those pursuing a capitalist road, i.e., turn your attention away from the intellectuals and focus on the CCP leaders and cadres who are pursuing this capitalist road. Along with Jiang, Lin Biao was instrumental in encouraging Red Guards to denounce party leaders. At the 9th Party Congress of April 1969, Lin Biao became vice chairman and Mao's successor. However, Mao quickly began to question the authority he had entrusted to Lin Biao and the PLA, and he began to undermine Lin Biao at various points. Now, I'll mention that in a bit more detail in our next video. In September 1971, Lin and his family were aboard a plane that crashed in Mongolia. Now, the circumstances around that are interesting, so I will again cover that in the next video. So this is apparently while they were fleeing China to the Soviet Union. So they were the main revolutionary forces of the revolution, Red Guards and rebel workers being the key on-the-ground forces, while the Gang of Four and Lin Biao being the key forces within the government. Let's have a look at the targets of the revolution, starting with intellectuals. So when the Red Guard movement began in June 1966, intellectuals were the first targets. After Lin Biao called on Red Guards to destroy the Four Olds, the Red Guards responded by attacking their teachers, lecturers, and academics. Many teachers were put through struggle sessions, which involved hanging signs around their necks with their names crossed out and replaced with insulting names like cow demon, snake spirit, that's meant to say, or capitalist roader. They were also forced to wear tall paper dunce caps, which we've seen an image of this in class and in a prior video. They ripped their clothes, cut their hair into ridiculous hairstyles. They smeared ink all over them. They were also put through more extreme humiliations, such as, let me find a good example. Well, in middle school, so I did mention here that middle school students were often the most violent. The Red Guards used clubs and leather belts to beat people, sometimes killing them or leaving them with permanent injuries. The headmistress of a girls' school was made to carry heavy bricks around the campus, had boiling water poured over her, and was beaten with belts and sticks studded with nails. She died of her injuries. A former teacher recalled the tragedies that occurred at his school. He said, on the athletic field, every few days, several teachers would be taken out and shot in public. Some teachers were buried alive. On the roof over there, 4 teachers were ordered to sit on a pack of explosives and to light it themselves. So the struggle sessions were really violent and brutal by the Red Guards. Between struggle sessions, victims were often kept in makeshift jail cells called cowsheds. So it was a really humiliating and often deadly experience for intellectuals and teachers. As I said, middle school students were often the most violent, and Dazibao, or big character posters, which I mentioned in our last video, were pasted all over the cities, particularly Beijing, condemning intellectuals. So intellectuals were the first human target of the revolution. CCP Cadres and Leaders. So on the 15th of September 1966, as I mentioned before, Lin Biao urged Red Guards to focus on denouncing those power holders inside the party pursuing a capitalist road. Red Guards, as a result, bombarded the headquarters of provincial party officers. Remember that bombard the headquarters was the title of Mao's big character poster. And so these Red Guards put cadres through struggle sessions and denunciation rallies. On the 23rd of October, 1966, so this is all happening within a few months, Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping were forced to deliver self-criticisms to the Central Committee. Liu no longer willingly appeared in public, though he and his wife Wang Guangmei went through many struggles by Red Guards. The most humiliating of these for Wang Guangmei was when she was brought to Beijing University in April 1967 and made to wear a tight-fitting qipao dress, so like a traditional Chinese dress, high heels, and a necklace of ping pong balls, a symbolic condemnation of the bourgeois clothing she wore in 1963 when greeting President Sukarno from Japan. And in December 1966, on Mao's 73rd birthday, he toasted the unfolding of all-round civil war. So Mao was at this point quite pleased with the purging and denunciation of CCP cadres and leaders. By mid-1967, Red Guards set up camp outside CCP headquarters. Now, urged on by these two forces of the revolution, Lin Biao and Jiang, the Red Guards put many leading figures through struggles and denunciation meetings. Peng Zhen, who you'll remember was the former Beijing mayor, endured more than 200 denunciation meetings, while Peng Dehuai, the previously purged defense minister, was assaulted 135 times. He had half his bones broken and his liver was permanently damaged. Family members also suffered. So Deng Xiaoping's son was thrown out of a window and left paraplegic. Was left a paraplegic. On the 1st of April 1967, the People's Daily named Liu Shaoqi China's biggest capitalist roader. So this is all about the expulsion and denunciation of Liu Shaoqi. From July of that year, Liu was held in solitary confinement between struggle sessions. On the 31st of October 1968, he was formally stripped of his positions and expelled from the party. On the 12th of November 1969, Liu died of pneumonia in a prison cell, although his death was not made public until after Mao's death in 1976. So he died in 69 and then was just sort of never spoken of except in propaganda about the capitalist roaders that the Cultural Revolution was targeting. Now, the final target of the Cultural Revolution that we'll look at is the Four Olds. Now, I said before that intellectuals were the first human target of the revolution. That's because the Four Olds were not human. They were pre-communist elements of Chinese culture. So the Destroy the Four Olds campaign aimed to destroy old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits. This was a Red Guard-led campaign after an August 18th, 1966 rally in which both Mao and Lin Biao urged the students to destroy the Four Olds. As a result of this, names of streets and stores were changed. So, for instance, they were changed to Red Guard Road or Defending Mao Zedong Clothes Store. There was social change. So the right to rebel meant that students and young people could finally fight back against their elders. Confucianism had encouraged respect for elders and respect for leaders. And now young people were fighting back against that. Girls also played a major role in the campaign. Here's a quote: "Times have changed. Men and women are the same. What men can do, women can also do." Red Guards raided museums and houses, destroying anything considered reactionary, old, foreign, or associated with Confucius and co. In November 1966, Confucius's grave was vandalized. So Confucius, for those that don't know, Confucius was a Chinese philosopher and really is was the key sort of key religion, not really religion. Confucianism, it's more a belief system in China for thousands of years, since for over a couple of thousand years. books were burned. Now that brings us back to if you'll remember from Year 7 history, Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China, also ordered the burning of Confucian books. The same was done again during the Cultural Revolution when Red Guards, as you can see in this source here, destroyed and burned Confucian books. Some places, however, were protected, particularly by Zhou Enlai. So the Forbidden City was protected from the Red Guards. And here's a quote from Lin Biao. He said, "The revolutionary torrents of the masses are washing away all the sludge and filth left over from the old society." So that brings us to the end of this video. So just to recap, the 4 key revolutionary groups, the revolutionary forces were the Red Guards of students, the rebel workers, particularly in Shanghai, Lin Biao, and Jiang Qing's Gang of Four. The key revolutionary targets were the Four Olds, as we've just seen, as well as Liu Shaoqi, Deng Xiaoping, all those capitalist rhoda CCP leaders, as well as CCP cadres and intellectuals. So I hope you found this video useful and interesting, and our next video will look at the years. So these first couple of videos have really looked at sort of 1966 and 1967. The next video will look at the years 1968 to 1976. So I look forward to that. Like I said, hope you found this interesting, and I will see you next time.